What's your villain origin story? 2 weeks ago at the beach, a man saw me playing fetch with my dog Gremlin and started sprinting toward us screaming. I thought he was crazy until his wife caught up to him and collapsed in the sand crying, and between sobs, she explained that I had their dog, their beloved pet, who had disappeared from their yard, and they had been searching for him non-stop. I had found Gremlin wandering near the hiking trails by my place 8 months earlier, no tags, skinny and covered in dirt, and assumed someone had abandoned him. The wife pulled up dozens of photos on her phone showing a dog who looked exactly like Gremlin lounging on their patio, playing with their kids, sitting in their fancy SUV. She said his real name was Bentley, and when she called that name, Gremlin tilted his head and whined, which made my blood run cold because I had been convinced he was a stray. The man was hugging Gremlin so tight the dog could barely breathe while Gremlin wagged his tail like crazy, and the wife opened her purse and started pulling out $100 bills. "We can give you $7,000 for him," she said, her voice breaking as she counted the cash. "You saved his life, and we need to pay you back for all the vet care and food and everything you did, because we thought we would never see him again." I looked at the money feeling nauseous, because I did not want their cash, and I absolutely did not want to lose Gremlin. This dog had gotten me through the darkest period of my entire life, staying by my side every night when I could not stop thinking about my ex, making me get out of bed when all I wanted was to disappear forever. But seeing this couple break down while showing me vacation photos with their dog made something twist in my chest. These people were completely shattered over losing their pet, and I was keeping him from his actual family when I had just been the person who stumbled across him. If they were ready to hand over $7,000 without hesitation, he must be their entire world. I told them to put their money away and just take him, that I was happy he had people who cared about him this deeply. The man wrapped me in a hug that lasted way too long while telling me I was an angel. Gremlin kept turning around to stare at me as the woman clipped a leash onto his collar, looking confused about why I was not following them. The wife talked to him in a high-pitched baby voice, telling him they were finally going home. I convinced myself he would have a better life with his real owners, with a big yard and kids to play with like in all those photos. The man grabbed my hand and said, "Most people would have kept him and taken the money. You're incredibly kind." And I stood there on the empty beach fighting back tears. But I lost that fight pretty quickly. Gremlin was the best dog I had ever known, and I'd had zero warning that morning that it was our last day together. The next month was every bit as awful as I feared. I kept expecting Gremlin to be there every time I walked through my door, kept dropping food on the floor before remembering he was not around to eat it. I adopted a hamster just to have another living creature in my space, but it was nothing like having someone actually happy I existed. I started driving a different route to avoid the beach and donated his toys because seeing them made me want to break things. But I kept telling myself at least he was home where he belonged. I really hoped his family would reach out, maybe text me a photo of him all happy and settled, but I never heard anything. Then 2 days ago, I was browsing Facebook Marketplace trying to find a used bookshelf when I saw a post that made my heart stop. Someone had shared a warning that said, "Alert, dog thieves operating in area," with a grainy doorbell camera screenshot attached. The post described how scammers were taking purebred dogs from beaches and parks, then flipping them to breeding operations and international buyers for insane money. They operated as a team, always a married couple, and used emotional manipulation about their missing pet to trick owners into surrendering their dogs. My entire body went cold as I zoomed in on the screenshot. Even though the image quality was terrible, I recognized them immediately, the same couple from the beach, walking someone else's Labrador into the exact same vehicle Gremlin had jumped into. The post mentioned that Australian Shepherds like mine were especially sought after, particularly the blue merle coloring, which could bring in $30,000 from buyers in Dubai. I had not even realized Gremlin was a valuable breed, just thought he was a beautiful mutt who needed someone. They had stolen my dog by weaponizing my kindness, using my own conscience against me, and were probably already selling him to some breeding farm where he would spend his entire existence in a cramped kennel. These people were professional thieves who had watched me and Gremlin, calculated their story, and performed it flawlessly while I stood there buying every single word. I had been conned by actual dog traffickers who were going to sell the only creature that had made me want to keep living this year. I did not know how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing for certain. There was absolutely no way I was letting them sell Gremlin to some collector. No way I was letting him vanish into some international pet smuggling operation. I was going to track these people down and take my dog back, even if it meant becoming a criminal myself. I spent the entire night staring at that Facebook post, zooming in on the grainy doorbell screenshot until my eyes burned from the screen brightness. My hands shook as I took screenshot after screenshot, saving every angle and every comment from people warning about the scam. I opened a blank document on my laptop and started typing out everything I could remember about the beach encounter, writing down the exact words the woman used. When she counted those $100 bills, how the man hugged Gremlin so tight I thought he might hurt him, the way they both cried and acted like their world was ending. I wrote down what the SUV looked like, the color of the woman's purse, even the stupid baby voice she used when talking to Gremlin. Every detail mattered now, because these people were professionals, and I needed to remember everything if I was going to find them. My coffee went cold sitting next to my keyboard, but I did not stop typing. By 3 in the morning, I had compiled pages and pages of notes and started cross-referencing that Facebook warning post across every local lost pet group I could find in the area. I joined groups from cities I had never even visited, scrolling through months of posts looking for similar warnings or reports. That was when I discovered the pattern that made my stomach drop. 3 other cities within 200 miles had nearly identical warnings posted over the past year, all describing the same thing: an emotional couple with a missing pet story, purebred dogs that mysteriously vanished after the owners handed them over. One post from a city about 150 miles north mentioned they specifically target dog parks and beaches, watching for owners with valuable breeds before staging their whole performance. Another post described how they had fake photos ready to show, pictures that looked convincing enough to make people believe the story. I felt sick reading through all these warnings, realizing how many people had fallen for the exact same con I did. At 6 in the morning, I called Ren, my friend who works in IT security and keeps weird hours because he does contract work for companies overseas. He answered on the second ring, and I explained everything in a rush. Talking so fast, I barely took breaths between sentences. He told me to come over right away and bring all my screenshots and documentation. When I arrived at his apartment 20 minutes later, he already had his laptop open and 3 monitors running on his desk, the blue glow lighting up his whole living room. I dumped my phone and laptop on his coffee table, and he got to work immediately, not even asking me to explain more details. Ren taught me the basics of something called OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence Gathering, and we started analyzing every single pixel of that doorbell camera screenshot from the Facebook post. He had software that could enhance image quality and sharpen blurry details, and I watched as he zoomed in on the vehicle in the background. After about 30 minutes of adjusting settings and filters, he managed to identify the make and model as a dark blue Honda CR-V, probably from 2018 or 2019, based on the body style and headlight shape. We could not make out the full license plate because the angle was wrong and the image quality was too poor, but we got a partial pattern that showed 3 letters starting with what looked like either a J or a T, then 2 numbers that might be 4 and 7. Ren saved enhanced versions of the image and printed them out on his color printer, and I felt like I finally had something concrete to work with instead of just anger and desperation. That afternoon, I drove to the police station downtown, bringing all my printed documentation and the enhanced photos Ren had created. I waited in the lobby for 20 minutes before a detective named Miriam Siegel called me back to her desk in a cramped office that smelled like burnt coffee and old paperwork. She took my statement and listened carefully while I explained the whole situation, but I could see the doubt in her eyes when I got to the part about voluntarily giving them the dog. She told me honestly that these cases were difficult to pursue because I technically surrendered Gremlin willingly, and tracking down mobile theft rings was resource-intensive with no guarantees of results. The department had limited resources, and they had to prioritize cases where there was clear evidence of force or breaking and entering. I felt frustration building in my chest, but I kept my voice calm and asked her to at least file an official report so there would be a record. She agreed to do that and took copies of all my documentation, including the enhanced vehicle photos. I left the station feeling defeated, but telling myself that at least now there was something on file if these people got caught doing this to someone else. That evening, I created posts in every lost and found pet group within 300 miles, carefully explaining the scam without revealing too much about my own investigation, because I did not want to tip off the thieves if they were monitoring these groups. I described the pattern, the emotional couple, the beach setting, the way they had convincing photos ready. Within 2 hours, my phone started blowing up with private messages. 3 other people contacted me with nearly identical stories, and we compared notes in a group chat I set up. One woman had lost a valuable golden retriever at a dog park 6 months ago. Another man had surrendered his purebred German Shepherd at a beach 3 months back. A third person described losing an expensive French bulldog in almost the exact same way I lost Gremlin. We started building a timeline of their movements and realized they were working a circuit through different cities every few weeks. probably to avoid getting caught in any one area. The next morning, I drove to the veterinary clinic where I had taken Gremlin for his checkups over the past 8 months. Kathy Barnes, the vet who treated him, remembered us immediately when I walked in and asked about Gremlin. I explained the whole situation, and she looked genuinely upset for me, then pulled up his file on her computer. She showed me the detailed documentation she kept of his unique markings, including a specific pattern of spots on his left rear leg that looked almost like a constellation and a small notch in his right ear that she had noted during his first exam. She explained that microchip records and these physical identifiers could be crucial for proving ownership if we ever located him, especially since I had brought him in as a stray with no prior records. Kathy offered to write an official statement describing his condition when I first brought him in 8 months ago, noting that he had been underweight and had untreated skin issues consistent with neglect or abandonment. That afternoon, Ren called me with an idea that made my stomach flip. He suggested we should create a decoy listing online for a blue Merle Australian Shepherd, using careful wording to attract the thieves while screening out legitimate buyers. I spent the next 4 hours crafting the perfect post, using photos of a similar dog I got from a breed rescue contact who agreed to help. I priced the dog at $3,500, just high enough to seem realistic, but low enough to attract quick flip scammers who wanted to buy low and sell high. We included specific details that matched what we knew about the thieves' preferences, mentioning the dog was purebred with papers and located near a beach area. I posted it on multiple platforms, including the same marketplace where I had seen the warning about the scam. The decoy listing went live the next morning, and my phone started getting inquiries almost immediately. Within 6 hours, I had received 4 messages, but none of them felt right. The questions were too specific about the dog's health history and background, asking about hip scores and genetic testing, the kind of detailed stuff that real buyers who planned to keep the dog would want to know. I was starting to think the thieves were too smart for this approach when a 5th message came through that evening. A married couple asked if they could see the dog tomorrow, mentioning they had been searching for months after their dog disappeared, and this one looked exactly like him. The phrasing felt familiar in a way that made my pulse race and my hands start shaking. I read the message 3 times, analyzing every word choice and comparing it to what I remembered from the beach encounter. I responded carefully to set up a meeting at a public park, suggesting a time and location that would be busy with other people around. The couple agreed immediately, which seemed like a good sign. But then, an hour before we were supposed to meet, they sent a message claiming a family emergency and asking to reschedule. I agreed to meet the next day instead. The same thing happened again, another cancellation with another excuse about work conflicts. On the 3rd attempt, they no-showed completely without even sending a message. Ren thought they might be running counter-surveillance to make sure I was not law enforcement or setting some kind of trap. I felt impatient and frustrated, like they were always one step ahead no matter what I tried. The next afternoon, I got a message through the Facebook group from someone who said they spotted a dark blue CRV matching the description near a storage facility on the industrial side of town. I grabbed my phone and drove over immediately, trying to keep my speed reasonable even though my foot wanted to slam the gas pedal. The storage place was one of those big complexes with rows of orange metal units and a chain-link fence around the perimeter. I circled the parking lot once, and there it was, a Honda CR-V with the right color and body style sitting near Unit Row D. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and started taking photos through my windshield, zooming in on the partial plate visible from my angle. The numbers looked right, maybe a J or T at the start, followed by what could be 47. I drove around the block twice more, getting different angles but staying far enough back that I would not look obvious if anyone was watching. My heart hammered against my ribs the whole time, and I kept checking my mirrors expecting to see someone following me. I called Ren as soon as I got home and told him about the CRV. He said we should go back after dark and set up proper surveillance with his good camera instead of my phone. Around 8 p.m., we parked down the street from the storage facility entrance, with a clear view of the units where I had seen the vehicle earlier. Ren had his laptop open running some kind of tracking software while I sat in the passenger seat with binoculars that made me feel like a wannabe detective. We waited for almost an hour before anything happened, just watching cars come and go from other units while mosquitoes buzzed around outside. Then around 9, the couple's SUV pulled into the lot and parked near the same unit I had photographed earlier. The man got out first and unlocked the unit, while the woman stayed in the vehicle checking her phone. A few minutes later, he emerged carrying a medium-sized dog crate, the kind with metal bars on the sides, and loaded it into the back of the SUV. I grabbed Ren's camera and zoomed in as far as it would go, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the whole thing. I managed to get clear shots of both their faces and a perfect view of the license plate before they closed the hatch. The woman got out, and they stood talking for maybe 30 seconds before getting back in the vehicle. We followed them out of the parking lot, staying back 2 car lengths like Ren said, but after 3 blocks, they made a sudden sharp turn into a residential neighborhood. Ren told me to keep going straight because he thought they might have spotted us, and my stomach dropped, thinking we had blown our chance. First thing the next morning, I printed out the best photos and drove to the police station. Detective Miriam was at her desk, drinking coffee from a mug that said something about loving dogs, which felt like either perfect timing or cruel irony. I spread the photos out in front of her and explained about the storage facility and the surveillance. She picked up the image showing the license plate and studied it for a long moment, then turned to her computer and started typing. Her expression changed as she read whatever came up on her screen, shifting from polite interest to actual concern that made my pulse speed up. She told me the vehicle was registered to an LLC with a business address listed as just a P.O. box, and that LLC had been flagged before in connection with animal welfare complaints in another county. She said this moved my case up in priority because it suggested organized criminal activity rather than just some opportunistic couple stealing dogs when they saw a chance. I felt a weird mix of validation and dread, like I was right about how serious this was, but also realizing it was bigger than I thought. Detective Miriam leaned back in her chair and gave me a hard look before explaining that I needed to be very careful about conducting my own surveillance and following suspects. She said if the couple realized what I was doing, they could file harassment charges, or worse, they could get violent if they felt cornered. I promised her I would back off and let the police handle everything from here, but even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew I was lying. There was no way I could just sit at home doing nothing while they moved Gremlin around and planned to ship him overseas. She gave me this look that said she knew exactly what I was thinking and did not believe my promise for 1 second, but she made me swear to at least keep her informed of anything I found. I agreed to that part honestly, because I wanted her to have all the evidence I could gather. That afternoon, I met Lisa at a coffee shop downtown, the woman whose golden retriever had been taken using the same scam 4 months earlier. She was probably in her 50s with gray streaks in her hair and tired eyes that looked like they had cried too many tears. We sat in a corner booth for over 2 hours while she walked me through every single detail of her encounter with the thieves. She said they had watched her and her dog at the park for at least a week before approaching, learning their routine and what time they usually showed up. They researched everything about golden retrievers so they could answer questions convincingly, and they even practiced the emotional breakdown to make it look natural and desperate. Lisa described how the woman had actual tears running down her face and how the man's voice cracked when he talked about their missing dog. She told me she never got her dog back and eventually had to accept the loss after months of searching, but I could see in her face that she had never really accepted it at all. Hearing her story made something harden inside me, this determination that I would not end up like her, still wondering years later what happened to my dog. The next day, Ren spent hours mapping out all the reported incidents from the Facebook groups and police reports on a big timeline he created. He used different colored markers for different cities and drew lines connecting the dates and locations. By evening, he had found a pattern in how the thieves moved through the area, hitting different cities every few weeks, in a rotation that kept them ahead of local law enforcement. He also discovered something interesting about grooming salons, 3 specific places that appeared multiple times in victim reports as locations where people had seen the couple with recently acquired dogs. The salons were all in different parts of the city and owned by different people, which suggested the thieves were just using whatever was convenient rather than having inside help. Ren thought they probably needed to clean up the dogs and make them look well cared for before selling them to buyers who expected healthy animals. I visited the closest grooming salon that same afternoon with photos of the couple loaded on my phone. The place smelled like wet dog and shampoo, and a woman in her 30s wearing a blue apron was trimming a poodle when I walked in. I waited until she finished before showing her the photos and asking if she recognized these people. Her face changed immediately, and she said yes. She remembered them bringing in a blue Merle Australian Shepherd maybe 10 days ago. She thought it was strange at the time because the dog seemed really stressed and the couple was in a huge rush, not wanting to wait even though she had appointments backed up. She said she did not think much of it then, but now she felt concerned, hearing it might be connected to dog theft. I asked if she still had security footage from that day, and she said maybe, that her system kept recordings for 2 weeks before recording over them. She went to check her computer in the back office while I stood there trying not to get my hopes up too high. The groomer called me that evening while I was making dinner, which I immediately abandoned when I saw her number. She said she found the footage and managed to pull a clear still image showing the couple's faces and a better angle of their license plate than I had gotten at the storage facility. She described how the parking spot was right in front of her security camera, perfect positioning that showed everything, including part of the dog visible through the car window. I nearly started crying right there on the phone, just overwhelmed with relief that we finally had solid proof. She emailed me the file immediately, and I thanked her about 15 times before hanging up. I forwarded everything to Detective Miriam with a message saying this was the evidence we needed to move forward. Detective Miriam called me the next morning to say she had run the enhanced plate number and traced it back to the same LLC, but now she had enough information to dig deeper into the business records. She discovered the LLC had been renting vehicles and storage units across 4 different counties, using a rotation system that made them hard to track. The company name was something generic like Pet Transport Solutions or Animal Relocation Services, designed to sound legitimate without actually meaning anything. She said the listed owner was probably a fake identity, just a name on paperwork that would not lead anywhere if you tried to find the actual person. She told me this was bigger than a simple theft case now, and she was going to loop in the property crimes unit because it looked like an organized operation. I felt this weird combination of excitement that the case was getting more resources and fear that Gremlin might disappear before they could act. That evening, I decided to conduct my own stakeout at one of the rental properties tied to the LLC that Wren had found in the public records. I parked across the street from a small house with peeling paint and an overgrown yard, just sitting there watching for any activity. Nothing happened for almost 2 hours, and I was starting to think I had wasted my time when a neighbor came out walking a German Shepherd. I got out of my car and walked over, striking up a casual conversation about the neighborhood and mentioning I was thinking about renting in the area. The man was probably in his 60s and seemed happy to have someone to talk to. He said the people in that house kept really weird hours, lots of coming and going at night, and he had heard dogs barking at odd times, which seemed strange for a residential property. He told me he had thought about calling the city about it, but never got around to making a formal complaint. I thanked him for the information and got back in my car feeling like I was definitely on the right track, that this house was part of their operation somehow. The next morning, I drove to Kathy's vet clinic, and she cleared her schedule for 30 minutes to walk me through everything that would need to happen if we actually found Gremlin. She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes, while explaining that if police seized him, he would go into a holding period at the county animal shelter for at least 10 days. During that time, I would need to file ownership papers with the court, provide all my vet records showing the care I gave him, and submit photos proving his unique markings matched the dog in custody. She said the thieves could fight it by claiming they bought him legally, which would trigger a custody hearing that could take weeks or even months to resolve. The whole process sounded way more complicated than I expected. I felt my stomach drop thinking about Gremlins stuck in a shelter kennel for months while lawyers argued. Kathy must have seen my face change because she reached across the desk and told me she would serve as an expert witness if it came to that, testifying about his condition when I first brought him in and the care I provided. That offer meant everything to me. I thanked her about 5 times before leaving, clutching the folder of documents she had printed for me. That same afternoon, I was checking my phone every 10 minutes when I finally got a response to the decoy listing that made my pulse jump. A married couple using names I did not recognize, but writing in that same overly emotional style about their lost pet, asking if they could meet the dog tomorrow. The message had phrases like, "Our hearts are broken," and "We have been searching everywhere," that felt exactly like the script the thieves had used on me at the beach. I wrote back agreeing to meet them at a park near downtown the next afternoon, then immediately called Wren to coordinate. He said he would position himself across the park with his phone ready to record everything, and we agreed on hand signals in case something went wrong. I barely slept that night, running through every possible scenario in my head. Listen to 90 Seconds and rate me 5 stars on Spotify. Doing a giveaway for people who did this and show proof on my Instagram. There will be 4 winners, and you get to choose between a Spotify or Amazon gift card. The next day, I got to the park 20 minutes early and sat on a bench near the parking lot, watching every car that pulled in. Wren texted me that he was in position by the playground with a clear view of the meeting spot. 1 o'clock came and went with no sign of the couple. I waited another 30 minutes, checking my phone constantly for messages, but nothing came through. I was about to text Wren that it was a bust when I noticed a dark sedan circling the parking lot slowly, the passenger holding up what looked like a phone or camera pointed at me. Wren saw it too and sent me a quick message saying he got the plate number. I stood up and started walking toward my car, and the sedan immediately sped up and exited onto the main road. Wren and I both jumped in our vehicles and tried to follow, but they disappeared into traffic within 2 blocks. Later that evening, Detective Miriam called, and I told her about the no-show and the circling car. She ran the plate Ren captured, and her voice got tight when she told me it came back to a rental car company. She said the thieves were probably running counter-surveillance, checking to make sure I was not setting a trap with police backup. I felt completely deflated and paranoid, worried that they now knew someone was actively hunting them. The next morning, Ren called with a new lead he found digging through property records online. The LLC tied to the storage facility also owned a rural property about 40 minutes outside the city, listed as a kennel facility, but with no business license on file and no inspection records from animal control. He sent me the address, and I stared at it on my phone screen for hours, knowing Detective Miriam had specifically told me to back off and let her handle things. But the thought that Gremlin might be at that property, maybe locked in a kennel right now, made it impossible to just sit at home doing nothing. By evening, I convinced myself I would just drive out and look from the road, nothing more. I told myself I was not going to trespass or do anything stupid, just see if the place looked suspicious. The drive took almost an hour through increasingly rural roads until I found the address on a gravel lane with no streetlights. The property sat back from the main road behind a chain-link fence about 6 feet tall, and even from my car I could hear dogs barking from multiple buildings. I parked down the road and grabbed my phone, making sure the video recording was on before I walked back toward the fence in the dark. My hands were shaking as I got closer, and I could make out at least a dozen dogs in outdoor runs attached to what looked like converted storage sheds. Through the gaps in the fence, I spotted several breeds, including what might have been a golden retriever and a German shepherd. Then, in one of the kennels on the far side, I saw a blue Merle Australian shepherd that made my breath catch. The coloring looked right, and the size matched Gremlin. I was trying to zoom in with my phone camera to get a better look at the markings when I stepped on something that snapped loudly under my foot. Suddenly, motion sensor lights flooded the entire area, and someone started yelling from the house. I ran back toward my car, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode, and I felt something sharp scrape my leg as I squeezed through a gap in the fence. I did not stop running until I was in my car with the engine started, and I drove way too fast getting back to the main highway. My leg was bleeding through my jeans, but I did not care. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Detective Miriam, and I knew immediately it was bad news from her tone. The property owner had filed a trespassing complaint against me with the county sheriff, and she had to officially warn me that I could face criminal charges if I pulled something like that again. I felt sick with shame and anger at myself for being so stupid and reckless. But then her voice softened, and she said something that gave me a tiny bit of hope. She told me quietly that my complaint about the property actually helped her case, because now she could argue to a judge that there were ongoing public safety concerns, and she needed a warrant to investigate. Over the next 2 days, Detective Miriam worked every connection she had to get that warrant approved. She called me on the 3rd day to say she had gotten a limited welfare check warrant for the rural kennel based on my complaint combined with the other victims' reports and the business license violations. The warrant would be executed tomorrow morning, and while she could not let me be there, she promised to call me immediately if they found Gremlin. I barely slept that night, lying in bed alternating between hope that they would find him and dread that the property would be empty. That same afternoon, Ren called with something new he found digging through the LLC's financial records that were partially available through public databases. There were wire transfers labeled as export services and international transport going to accounts in Dubai and Singapore, matching exactly what that Facebook post had warned about. The amounts were huge, $30,000 to $50,000 per transaction happening every few weeks. My blood ran cold as I realized Gremlin was not just stolen property to these people. He was inventory worth more than my car, a product they planned to ship overseas and sell to some breeder who would keep him in a cage for the rest of his life. The next day, I got an anonymous message through one of the pet recovery groups I had joined. The person claimed to have worked briefly for the theft ring before quitting because they could not handle what was happening to the dogs. They said the operation moved dogs through a network of unregistered storage units and temporary foster homes, never keeping them in one place more than a few days. The couple I encountered were just the acquisition team who stole the dogs, while other people handled the transport and international sales. The message ended with a warning that the operation was bigger than I thought, and I should be careful. I took screenshots of everything and sent it all to Detective Miriam, though I had no idea if the tip was real or just someone messing with me. Over the next 2 nights, I drove past the storage facility where we had first spotted the couple, parking in different locations each time to avoid being obvious. On the second night, I waited until almost midnight, then walked to the dumpsters behind the building. I found discarded paperwork including rental invoices with dates and unit numbers, plus what looked like a shipping manifest with dog breed descriptions, but no actual names listed. I also had my dash cam running the whole time, capturing footage of the couple's vehicle coming and going from the facility. It felt different from the panicked trespassing at the rural property, more careful and planned. I documented everything with timestamps and GPS coordinates, building a case file that Detective Miriam could actually use. The next morning, I called Kathy and asked if she had time to meet me at her clinic because I needed her help with something important. She told me to come by after lunch, and when I arrived, she was waiting in an exam room with a notepad and her laptop open. I spread out every photo I had of Gremlin from the past 8 months across the exam table, hundreds of pictures showing him from different angles and in different lighting. Kathy pulled up the grainy image I had captured at the rural kennel on her screen and started comparing it to my photos with the careful attention of someone who had spent years studying animal anatomy. She zoomed in on specific areas and made notes about the spot pattern on his left rear leg, explaining that the arrangement was unique enough to serve as a fingerprint. The notch in his right ear was another distinctive marker, plus a cowlick pattern in the fur on his shoulder that swirled in a specific direction. She created a detailed comparison document with labeled photos and measurements, professional enough to submit to a court if we ever got to that point. Kathy printed out 3 copies and put them in folders, handing one to me and keeping the others for her records. She also wrote an official statement describing the condition Gremlin was in when I first brought him to her clinic 8 months ago, noting his weight and the signs of neglect that suggested he had been wandering for some time. The whole process took almost 2 hours, and by the end, I felt like we had built something solid, real evidence that could prove ownership if it came down to a legal fight. The next afternoon, my phone rang while I was sitting at home staring at the documentation Kathy had prepared. Detective Miriam's name appeared on the screen, and I answered immediately, my pulse jumping because I knew the warrant had been executed that morning. Her voice came through tired and frustrated before she even explained what happened. They had seized 11 dogs from the rural property, all purebreds in various conditions ranging from healthy to seriously neglected. But Gremlin was not among them. The property owner claimed to be running a legitimate rescue operation and had paperwork for most of the animals, though the conditions were poor enough to warrant animal welfare charges. 3 of the dogs had already been matched to theft reports from other areas, which meant my tip had helped other people, even if it did not help me. Detective Miriam told me she was sorry and that they were still actively investigating, but I could barely hear her over the crushing disappointment in my chest. I thanked her for trying and hung up feeling like I had just hit a concrete wall after getting so close to finding him. 2 days later, Lisa called me, and I could hear her crying before she even said hello. One of the dogs seized from the rural property turned out to be her missing golden retriever, and the shelter had contacted her for identification that morning. She kept thanking me over and over, saying that if I had not pushed the investigation forward, her dog would still be trapped in that place. We met for coffee that afternoon, and she showed me photos of her reunion with her dog, both of them looking so happy it made my throat tight. I was genuinely glad for her because I knew exactly what she had been going through these past months. But sitting across from her while she talked about how grateful she was, I also felt a burning jealousy that her dog came home while mine was still missing. She must have seen something in my face because she reached across the table and hugged me, telling me not to lose hope. The fact that they found her dog meant the whole operation was falling apart, she said, and that had to mean Gremlin would turn up soon. I wanted to believe her, but mostly I just felt hollow and tired. Ren called me the next evening with an update that made my stomach drop. He had been monitoring the couple's patterns through their digital footprints and noticed they had changed their behavior completely. The storage unit we had been watching was emptied out. The rental property was abandoned with the utilities shut off, and their vehicle had not been spotted in any of the usual locations for over a week. He thought they were moving faster now because they knew law enforcement was closing in, which meant Gremlin's timeline was getting shorter. If they were going to ship him overseas, they would do it soon before the investigation tightened further around them. I felt panic rising in my chest at the thought of running out of time, of Gremlin being loaded onto a plane and disappearing forever into some international breeding operation. Ren tried to reassure me that Detective Miriam was still working the case, but I could hear the worry in his voice too. 3 days later, I received another anonymous message through the pet recovery group, this one more specific than the previous tips. It said Gremlin had been moved to a storage facility on the east side of town, with a unit number partially visible as something ending in 47. The message included a grainy photo of a blue Merle Australian Shepherd being led on a leash into a storage building, and while the image quality was terrible, I could make out markings that looked right. My hands shook as I forwarded everything to Detective Miriam with a message begging her to move fast before they relocated him again. She responded within an hour, saying she would look into it, but reminded me not to go near the location myself. I promised her I would stay away, but even as I typed the words, I knew I was lying. That evening, Ren and I drove to the storage facility on the east side, parking in a spot that gave us a view of the units in the 40s range. We sat there for almost 3 hours with my camera ready and Ren's laptop tracking any activity. Around 8 o'clock, the couple's dark blue SUV pulled into the parking lot, and I grabbed my camera so fast I almost dropped it. We watched them walk to a unit that matched the tip and disappear inside, staying there for maybe 20 minutes before coming back out. The man was carrying what looked like an empty dog crate, and they loaded it into their vehicle before driving away. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera steady, but I managed to get clear shots of their faces and the unit number, which was 247. This was the closest we had been to finding Gremlin in weeks, and I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. Ren pulled out his phone and started documenting everything with timestamps and GPS coordinates, while I just sat there trying to breathe normally. The next afternoon, I was sitting in my car near the storage facility again, unable to stay away even though I knew I should. Around 2 o'clock, the couple's SUV pulled in, and something inside me snapped. I got out of my car with my phone recording and walked straight toward them in the parking lot. The woman saw me first, and her face went completely blank, like she was putting on a mask. I asked them directly about the dogs they had stolen, and she looked at me like I was speaking another language. The man stepped forward and told me I needed to leave them alone, or they would call the police. I brought up Gremlin specifically, describing the beach encounter, and how they had taken him from me with their fake story. The woman actually laughed and said I must have them confused with someone else, that they had never seen me before in their lives. The gaslighting was so smooth and practiced that for a second I questioned my own memory, even though I knew exactly who they were. They got back in their SUV and drove away while I stood there in the parking lot still recording, feeling stupid and desperate and angry all at once. 2 days later, someone knocked on my apartment door, and when I opened it, a police officer I had never seen before was standing there with a formal document. The couple had filed a harassment complaint claiming I had been stalking them and making false accusations. If I contacted them again or came near their property, I could face a restraining order and criminal charges. The officer handed me the warning and left without saying much else. I called Detective Miriam immediately in a complete panic, and she sighed before telling me I needed to back off completely now because I had put myself in serious legal trouble. She promised the investigation was still active, but I had to let her handle it through proper channels from now on. I hung up feeling sick because I had just made everything worse and possibly damaged the case against the thieves. The next morning, I looked up lawyers who specialized in criminal defense and found Raymond Sterling, whose website said he handled harassment and stalking cases. His office was in a building downtown, and when I met with him that afternoon, he listened carefully while I explained everything I had done. The trespassing at the rural property, the surveillance at multiple locations, the confrontation in the parking lot. He reviewed the harassment warning and told me honestly that I was walking a very thin line, but probably would not face serious charges if I stopped all contact immediately. He agreed to represent me if needed and advised me to document everything I had done so far in case it became important later. The consultation cost $300, which I could barely afford, but it was worth it to understand exactly how much trouble I was in. Raymond gave me his card and told me to call him immediately if anything else happened. For the next week, I forced myself to stay completely away from any active investigation, which felt like trying to hold my breath underwater. I channeled all my energy into organizing my case files and evidence for Detective Miriam, creating a detailed timeline that showed every sighting and tip and piece of information we had gathered. I cross-referenced all the tips and sightings, looking for patterns in when and where the couple moved dogs. I compiled everything into a folder that was almost 2 inches thick, a complete record of the theft ring's operations as far as we could track them. It felt productive, but also completely helpless, like I was watching from the sidelines while time ran out and Gremlin got further away. Ren checked in with me every single day to make sure I was not doing anything stupid, and honestly, his friendship was one of the only things keeping me from losing it completely. He kept reminding me that Detective Miriam was still working the case and that we had done everything we could without crossing more legal lines. I wanted to believe him, but mostly I just felt trapped and useless while my dog was still out there somewhere. Detective Miriam called me 4 days later, and I could hear something different in her voice, less cautious and more focused. She told me she had been building a case using everything I provided plus her own investigation, and she thought she had enough to get a warrant for the specific storage unit where we saw the couple. The challenge was moving fast enough before they relocated again, and she was working with a judge who was sympathetic but cautious about authorizing searches based partially on anonymous tips. She told me to sit tight and let the system work, which was easier said than done when every hour felt like Gremlin was getting further away. I spent those next 3 days barely sleeping, checking my phone constantly, jumping every time it buzzed. Ren tried to distract me with movies and takeout, but I could not focus on anything except waiting for news. The warrant finally got approved and executed on the third day, and Detective Miriam called me that afternoon with news that made me want to punch a wall. The storage unit was completely emptied when they arrived. No dogs, no equipment, just some discarded paperwork, including a cargo receipt for live animal shipment scheduled for the next morning. They were literally one step ahead of us, and now we were in a race against time to stop the shipment before Gremlin disappeared onto an international flight. My hands shook as I listened to her explain they were trying to verify the cargo details and coordinate with airport security, but the timeline was tight, and she could not promise anything. I called Kathy immediately after hanging up with Detective Miriam, my voice cracking as I explained the situation. She did not hesitate, telling me she would use her professional network to help verify the airline cargo records and call in favors with colleagues who work in animal transport. She called me back 2 hours later, and I could barely breathe waiting for her to speak. She managed to confirm that a shipment of 3 Australian Shepherds was booked on a cargo flight leaving tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., headed to Dubai with a connecting flight to Singapore. The dogs were listed under generic names, but one was described as a blue Merle male, matching Gremlin's approximate age and weight. This was our last chance, and if we missed this flight, he would be gone forever. Kathy gave me the flight number and cargo details, and I forwarded everything to Detective Miriam while pacing my apartment so hard I probably wore grooves in the floor. Detective Miriam called back within 30 minutes to tell me she was coordinating with airport police for an intercept at the cargo hold before the flight loaded. I was not allowed anywhere near the airport, but she promised to call me the moment they knew anything. I spent the entire night awake, pacing my apartment and checking my phone every 30 seconds, even though I knew nothing would happen until morning. Ren showed up at my door around 3 a.m. because he knew I was losing it. He did not say much, just came in and sat on my couch while I wore a path in the carpet. We sat together in silence waiting for dawn, and I watched the clock tick from 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. My phone stayed quiet, and I started to panic, imagining the plane taking off with Gremlin locked in a crate, heading to some buyer in Dubai who would use him for breeding. At 7:15, my phone finally rang, and I answered so fast I almost dropped it. Detective Miriam's voice came through, and I could hear relief in it before she even spoke. They found the crate and intercepted the shipment at the cargo hold. There were 3 Australian Shepherds being loaded, and one of them matched Gremlin's description with the distinctive markings Kathy had documented. The dog was transferred to the county animal shelter for custody and evaluation, and I could come identify him this afternoon once they processed the paperwork. I was shaking so hard I dropped my phone after she hung up, and Ren had to pick it up off the floor. He drove me to the shelter because I was in no condition to operate a vehicle. My hands would not stop trembling, and I could barely form words. At the shelter, a staff member led me down a hallway to a holding area in the back. I saw him through the kennel door before she even opened it, Gremlin looking thinner and stressed, but alive and whole. When I called his name, he went absolutely crazy, jumping and whining and trying to get through the fence to me. He remembered me, he knew who I was, and watching him scratch at the door trying to reach me made my chest feel like it was splitting open. The shelter supervisor put her hand on my arm and told me I could not take him yet because he was evidence in an active case, and there was a custody dispute since the couple's lawyer was already claiming the dogs were legally acquired. I had to leave him there in that kennel, and walking away while he was crying and scratching at the door was one of the hardest things I had ever done. He kept making this sound I had never heard from him before, high-pitched and desperate, and I could still hear it echoing down the hallway as the staff member led me back to the lobby. Ren drove me home, and I sat in my apartment staring at the wall, knowing Gremlin was alive and safe, but not able to bring him home. The couple's attorney filed an emergency motion the next day contesting the seizure, claiming the dogs were purchased legitimately and the transport was legal. A custody hearing got scheduled for the following week, and Raymond called to tell me I needed to prepare for the possibility that this could drag out. The legal system moved slowly, and the couple had resources to fight, even though we all knew they were guilty. I spent the next few days gathering every piece of documentation I had, pulling out vet records and photos and witness statements and receipts for everything I spent on Gremlin over 8 months. I organized it all into folders by category, making copies of everything, creating a timeline with dates and details. I barely ate or slept, just worked on building the strongest case possible to prove he was mine. Raymond came to my apartment to review everything, spreading papers across my kitchen table and taking notes. He prepared my case methodically over the next several days, organizing evidence and lining up witnesses including Kathy, the groomer who saw the couple, and Lisa, whose dog was also recovered. He explained that we needed to prove not just that Gremlin was my dog, but that I acquired him legitimately as a stray and provided proper care. The couple's lawyer would argue I stole their client's property, so we needed to establish the timeline clearly and show their pattern of theft. It was exhausting and expensive, but I was committed to seeing it through no matter what it cost. The custody hearing happened on a Tuesday morning in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. I sat at a table next to Raymond while the couple sat across the aisle with their lawyer, and I tried not to look at them. The judge called me to testify, and I walked to the witness stand feeling like my legs might give out. I explained finding Gremlin as a stray 8 months ago, skinny and dirty near the hiking trails. I described the beach encounter, how convincing they were, how I believed their story about their missing dog. I told the judge about discovering the scam through Facebook, tracking them down, and everything I had done to find Gremlin. The couple's lawyer stood up when Raymond finished and started asking me questions designed to make me look like an obsessed stalker who would not accept that I made a mistake. He asked why I refused their money, suggested I knew all along the dog was not really a stray, implied I was making up the theft ring story because I regretted giving him back. Raymond countered with the pattern of theft reports from other victims, Lisa's testimony about her stolen golden retriever, and the physical evidence of Gremlin's unique markings matching my documentation from 8 months ago. Kathy testified as an expert witness about the distinctive spot pattern on his left rear leg and the notch in his right ear. The judge listened carefully and took notes, but did not rule immediately, saying she needed time to review everything. That same afternoon, I had to appear in a separate proceeding about the trespassing charge from the rural property. Raymond had negotiated a deal where I would plead no contest and accept a fine plus community service in exchange for no jail time and the charge being reduced to a misdemeanor. I stood before a different judge and admitted I had trespassed on private property while investigating the dog theft case. The judge accepted the plea agreement and ordered me to pay $800 plus complete 60 hours of community service at the county animal shelter, which felt almost poetic, given everything that happened. I accepted it without complaint because I knew I had crossed a line, even if it was for the right reasons. I wrote the check right there in the courthouse and got my community service assignment paperwork. Raymond walked out with me and told me the custody hearing went as well as could be expected, and now we just had to wait for the judge's decision, which could take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. 3 days felt like 3 years, but finally my phone rang and Raymond's name popped up on the screen. I answered before the first ring finished, and he told me the judge ruled in my favor, that she found the evidence clearly showed Gremlin was my dog based on the paperwork about his unique markings and my vet records and the pattern of theft by the couple. The shelter got permission to release him to me under a foster setup while the criminal case wrapped up, but Raymond said for all real purposes, Gremlin was coming home. I started crying right there on the phone, thanking Raymond over and over while he told me this was exactly what he expected to happen. I drove to the shelter that same afternoon and walked through those doors feeling like my chest might explode. The staff member brought me back to the holding area, and there he was, looking thinner and more stressed, but alive and whole. When I called his name, Gremlin went completely crazy, jumping up against the kennel door and making sounds I had never heard from him before. This high-pitched whining mixed with barking that made the other dogs start up too. The shelter staff was smiling as they handled the paperwork, and several of them mentioned they had been following my case and were happy to see things work out. I signed about 15 different forms, and they finally opened the kennel door. Gremlin jumped straight into my arms and started licking my face, and I just held him, not caring that he was getting slobber all over my shirt or that I was crying again in front of strangers. He would not let me put him down, clinging to me like he thought I might vanish if he let go for even a second. I carried him out to my car, and he shook the whole way, pressing himself against my chest. The drive home took twice as long as normal because I kept pulling over to hug him and make sure he was actually real and not some dream I was going to wake up from. Every time I stopped the car, he would look at me with these huge eyes and lick my hands. When we finally got back to my apartment, he ran from room to room like he was checking to make sure everything was still there, then came back and sat right on my feet. Over the next week, I took him to Kathy for a complete health check, and she went over every inch of him, checking his teeth and his weight and listening to his heart. She said he was a bit underweight and stressed, but otherwise healthy, which felt like a miracle considering what he had been through. I got him microchipped with my information right there in the office, watching the vet tech inject the tiny chip under his skin between his shoulder blades. We updated his license and registration with the county, and I bought him a GPS tracking collar that cost almost $200, but I did not care because I was never going to lose track of him again. The collar synced to an app on my phone that showed me exactly where he was at all times. I also called a dog trainer who worked with anxiety and trauma cases and set up an appointment for the following week because Gremlin was way more nervous than before, and I wanted to help him feel safe again. Every night he slept pressed against me in bed, his body tight and tense, and I woke up multiple times just to put my hand on him and make sure he was still breathing. Detective Miriam called me a few days later with an update on the bigger case. She told me the couple and 2 other people who were part of the theft ring got charged with multiple counts of theft and animal cruelty and fraud. They were out on bail, but looking at serious prison time if they got convicted, and the district attorney was building cases in 3 different counties. The whole investigation found at least 18 stolen dogs over 2 years, and the thieves had made over $400,000 selling them. Miriam said my stubbornness and all my documentation were really important to breaking the case open, but she also told me I was reckless and lucky I did not get hurt or end up in jail myself. I thanked her for not giving up on the case even when I made her job harder. She said most people who lose their pets never get them back, so she was glad this one worked out different. I started seeing a therapist the next week to deal with all the paranoia and fear that stuck around even after getting Gremlin back. I could not walk him anywhere without looking around constantly for threats, checking every person we passed to make sure they were not watching us. I had nightmares almost every night about people trying to take him again, waking up in a panic and reaching for him in the dark. The therapist was this older woman with gray hair who listened carefully and told me what I went through was an actual trauma, not just being dramatic or overreacting. She said it was completely normal to have these reactions after someone weaponized my kindness and stole something I loved. We worked on breathing exercises and grounding tricks to use when I felt the panic starting. She taught me to notice 5 things I could see, 4 things I could touch, 3 things I could hear, 2 things I could smell, 1 thing I could taste. It was slow going, and some days I felt like I was not making any progress at all, but it helped to have someone who understood and did not think I was crazy. I made sure to properly thank everyone who helped me get Gremlin back. I bought Ren a bottle of really good whiskey that cost $80 and told him how much his help meant, all those hours he spent doing computer research and sitting in parking lots with me. He said he was just glad the whole thing was over and I could stop being obsessed. I got Kathy a gift card to some fancy restaurant and wrote her a long note about how her knowledge and willingness to be an expert witness made all the difference. She sent me back a text saying she was happy to help and to bring Gremlin in any time. I took Detective Miriam out for coffee and apologized for being such a pain, for trespassing and confronting the thieves and generally making her job harder. She told me she understood why I did what I did, that she had seen plenty of people lose their pets, and most of them just had to accept it and move on. Raymond got paid his legal fees, which were not cheap, and I left him a really good review online. He said that was worth more than money because it would bring him new clients. The training sessions with Gremlin turned out to be way harder than I expected. The trainer was patient and knew what she was doing, but Gremlin had developed some serious fear responses that were not there before. He would panic if I left him alone for more than a few minutes, scratching at the door and barking until I came back. He got reactive to strangers in ways he never was before, growling at people who got too close or moved too fast. The trainer taught me about something called desensitization, where you slowly expose the dog to scary things in tiny amounts until they learn it is safe. We practiced with me leaving the room for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30, giving him treats every time I came back. Some days were better than others, and some days felt like we were going backwards. He still could not handle being alone, and he still got nervous around new people. But we kept working at it, because I was not giving up on him after everything we had been through. My community service at the animal shelter ended up meaning more to me than I thought it would. I worked in the kennels 3 days a week, cleaning out cages and feeding dogs and taking them for walks. I talked to other people who came in looking to adopt or who had lost their pets. Several times I was able to tell them about the theft scams and what to watch out for, the warning signs that someone might be running a con. I helped one family avoid what could have been the same situation I went through, spotting the red flags in a story some couple told them about their missing dog. The shelter supervisor told me I was welcome to keep volunteering even after my 60 hours were done. I actually thought about it because the work felt good, helping animals who needed someone. 4 months later, the couple's case finally went to trial, but they ended up pleading guilty to smaller charges instead of facing a jury. They each got 2 years in prison plus fines and money they had to pay back to the victims, and they could not own or work with animals for 10 years after they got out. It was not as much punishment as I wanted, not even close to what they deserved for stealing people's family members and selling them like products. But Raymond explained this was actually a pretty good outcome for this kind of crime, that a lot of times these cases get dropped, or the thieves just get probation. The other people in the theft ring got similar deals, and the whole operation got shut down for good. I felt some relief knowing they were going to prison, even if it was not for long enough. At least other people would not go through what I went through. The final court order came in the mail 2 weeks later, officially giving me legal ownership of Gremlin with no conditions or ways for anyone to appeal. I took the document out of the envelope and just stared at it for a while, this official paper with a judge's signature and a court seal. I went out and bought a frame that cost $30 and hung it on my wall in the living room. Ren came over that weekend and saw it and told me that was incredibly nerdy, but I did not care at all. That piece of paper meant months of work and thousands of dollars in legal fees, and the fact that I refused to give up when everyone told me to just move on and get another dog. Gremlin was legally and completely mine now, and nobody could ever take him from me again. I spent the next week sitting at my kitchen table writing checks and transferring money, watching my savings account drop by over $6,000 as I paid off Raymond's legal fees, the trespassing fine, vet bills for Gremlin's checkups, and credit card debt from all the surveillance equipment and travel expenses. It was more money than I had ever spent on anything except my beat-up car, and it meant I would be eating ramen and rice for the next few months while I built my savings back up. Every time I looked at the total amount, I felt a little sick, but then I would look at Gremlin sleeping on the couch and know I would make the same choice again without hesitation. Some things are worth going broke for, and getting my dog back was absolutely one of them. 6 months after bringing him home, I decided it was time to face the beach where I lost him. I kept Gremlin on a short leash as we walked across the parking lot, and my heart was pounding before we even reached the sand. Every person who walked past us made me tense up. Every dog owner who looked our way made me want to grab Gremlin and run back to the car, but we kept walking along the water, and I threw his tennis ball into the shallow waves while constantly scanning the beach for anyone approaching us. Gremlin seemed happy, splashing in the water and chasing his ball, and watching him play in the same spot where I lost him felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from both of us. It was not easy, and I checked over my shoulder probably 50 times, but we stayed for an hour, and nothing bad happened. Things will never be exactly like they were before all this started. I will always be more careful about who I talk to, always keep Gremlin on a leash in public places, always feel that spike of fear when strangers ask about him. Gremlin still has anxiety when I leave him alone, still gets nervous around new people in ways he never did before, but we are together, and we are safe, and I have Ren and Kathy, and even Detective Miriam, who helped us through the worst time of our lives. The scars from this whole experience are real, and they are not going away, but so is the proof that refusing to give up can actually work sometimes. Life is not perfect or neat, but it is ours, and that is enough. That is the story for today. Thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day to listen. I hope it reminded you that even small moments can mean something. Subscribe if you would like to hear more stories that feel real.